Hi, hey everyone, and welcome to the July 12th edition of Found Friday. I'm your host, Karen Skates, and with me today are Ray Griesel-Huber, our own founder and CEO. Hey, Ray.
Hey,
And Aaron O'Brien, our COO. I have the whole team here today. How's it going, everyone?
Good.
early, but
You
so
you
so good.
skipped a month. It's June.
It's, it is June. Oh.
It's
Oh,
fine. We'll
well.
forgive you.
Those J months, they all run together. So last week, you two started a discussion about keyword best practices to answer some questions we've been getting. And that discussion has led to even more questions. My inbox just blew up. So I thought we'd take the opportunity this week to take a little deeper dive and to talk specifically about semantic search. It's become a hot topic again as marketers are trying to find ways to break through some of the noise to reach their target audiences. So let's get started. And I like to get started by defining terms. So can we define keywords? What are they in today's marketing world, and are there different kinds?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit last week, but keywords are basically what people are searching for. So that's kind of the all-encompassing definition. A more specific definition would be very specific terms. So they tend to be things like nouns. You know, it could be, I mean, not necessarily nouns, but it could be basically anything that is a very concrete thing that someone's looking for. So it'd be something like pizza, New York, or coffee, Los Angeles. And because of the way search engines worked for a long time, searchers adapted their behavior to keyword type searching, and they would take what would be for them a natural question in their mind and kind of distill it down to these very specific keyword searches.
Yeah, and I think that some of that is also pertaining to what we saw with like Hummingbird's release, back in 2013. I want to say last year, but it's like really been 2 years now. Um, to what Ray said, it's really a more specific description of something. So people are looking for like how to do something. How do I do X? Or what is the best way? Or what is the best, you know, tennis racket? Like all kinds of different things. And so, I think originally when, kind of the idea of keywords really first started out, it was a very general thing, and that's really not something that people want to do. Like the thing we were talking about last week is very few people or very few brands are really going to have an advantage by trying to rank for the word shoe, right? Because most people wouldn't just type in shoes into a search thing. So what you're really looking for is a more specific type of shoe. You're looking to create content around those things. Department stores, places like Zappos and Amazon, it may have some benefit to ranking for shoes in general, but even then, like real content, real findability is going to be for something a little bit more specific. So yeah, there's also kind of the search demand curve, and I know that we had some questions around that too, and we'll talk a little bit more about that with the long tail and description of those.
So yeah, let's start by just talking about semantic search. Can you kind of wrap that up kind of in a nutshell? What is semantic search?
Yeah, semantic search, it's kind of a big topic, but if you are trying to get a definition, understanding the difference between traditional kind of keyword-based search versus semantic search, um, keyword search, if you remember, is kind of this distillation of, in your own, when you think about something you want to look for, you kind of have this natural language, and you you kind of distill into this keyword. So like an example would be, I want some coffee. Where should I go get coffee? I'm here in LA. And you basically distill that into coffee, Los Angeles. Um, Semantic search wouldn't be quite that full initial sentence, but it would be something more like that. So it would be something like more of like an actual question, like where can I find the best coffee in Los Angeles? Or where can I find the closest movie theater that has this movie? And so these are examples of kind of unpacking these distilled keywords into larger semantic searches, but that's a very kind of rudimentary example. A better example of the way semantic search works is what Google has done in particular is they've built this technology that is much better at understanding the overall context of what's going on. So we just had a discussion before we started about duct tape, and we were kind of making fun of people who think of they think duct tape is spelled duct tape, like D-U-C-K, and so we did a search on Google for duct tape, and it just basically immediately gave us the research results for duct tape because it kind of knows the context of what we're talking about. That's actually it's an example that is good at showing context, but the technology to solve that problem is actually even not really semantic search, but it's kind of what we're talking about here. So to further kind of talk about things, one of the things that the semantic web is this technology that's been around for a long time. Basically, it's a set of technologies and concepts, and really what it means is it's talking about building relationships from all of the text and content on the internet, building relationships from the different entities that it finds in there. So entities are examples of things like people, places, things, and all sorts of things. So if you're talking about a bunch of movies, a good example would be the listing of movies would be a set of entities. Each actor in these movies would be an entity, and so forth. And so the directors would all be their entities. And so once you start kind of graphing out these entities and parsing them out from all the text that's on the web, you can start to build what is called an entity graph. And it's basically, it allows you to see on the back end all these relationships between different things. And once you have that data set built, you can use that to provide much more sophisticated results to questions that tend to look a lot more like natural language queries.
Erin, do you have something to add to that?
I think let's kind of keep it moving on to, because I think that where we're going is going to dive more into semantic.
So let's talk now more about marketers and their focus. Where should they be focusing their efforts? Are there specific types of keywords that they should be looking at?
So, I mean, this kind of goes to this conversation about the search demand curve. And there's a lot of different descriptions of where keywords fall in different things. I'm going to use kind of similar descriptions to what Moz uses because we like those guys and they've got some really great content around the topic. So they'll call it the keywords that kind of contain the largest search volume percentage, which is usually around 18 to 20% of total search, is kind of the fat head of keywords, right? And then you've got what's called the chunky middle, which receives this like 11 to 12% of kind of keyword search volume, with an average monthly search usually in the thousands or in the hundreds, right? And those keywords that are in like this more like fat head area is literally like search volume in the millions and hundreds of thousands often. And then we've got what we call long-tail keywords, and this really comprises the remaining 70% of search volume for the most part, and those are keywords, so topics and terms and phrases that have somewhere in the hundreds of searches per month, right? And so what we're talking about when we're talking about long tail keywords is things with usually a lower monthly search volume, but also a lot of times highly specific. So there's also kind of an interesting thing around selecting keywords for marketers, which is a lot of times the keywords that are included in this long tail are, as Ray mentioned with duct tape, a misspelling or a misuse of a common word or phrase. And so people will oftentimes try to go ahead and rank for or include those topics and keywords in their targeting because they do know that it's a commonly misspelled phrase. So I think that there's a lot of conversation around this, and one of the things, Ray, you and I have seen is folks that have like a really small marketing or search department that then end up having a like 5,000 keyword list, which is almost impossible to really maintain from a marketing standpoint because you can't possibly really well manage and maintain content for that many keywords if you're a really small team. So I think that some of it's really going to be about prioritization in terms of, picking some keywords across various areas and starting to understand how you can really leverage those and building and growing kind of as you continue to evolve as a team, but you need to be able to show traction somewhere. So I would rather be able to show traction across 100 keywords than across 100,000 keywords and be like, look at all the keywords we're tracking, but not freaking ranking for. So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, and actually one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit has been this idea of moving away from a keyword-based mentality into more topics, because the thing that happens inevitably with keyword-based content targeting when you're creating new content and targeting specific keywords is the nice thing, the pro to that approach is you can get very specific estimates around how much search volume you're going to get. The con to that is because of the way semantic search is starting to work, there's no guarantee that even if you're perfectly well optimized and getting the right backlinks and everything else for that based on what Google's semantic-based algorithms are deciding, you're not necessarily going to get the search result for that as well. So we're kind of in this middle phase, but there are many cases now where it can be useful to target more general topics that maybe have like an aggregated search volume across a broad number of keywords that are still relevant to the overall topic at hand and creating content for that. And that kind of is useful when you're trying to brainstorm new content creation ideas, because you can usually think about much more interesting topics when you're or ideas for content when you're targeting topics versus keywords anyway.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting with semantic search in this conversation is that because semantic search is really trying to tie together intention and context, it's using things like location. So if I just search for coffee, it's going to assume that my likely intention is that I want to go get some coffee, and then it's going to say, oh, you're in, such and such place, and so it's going to serve up places I can get coffee in my specific location, as opposed to telling me necessarily the Wikipedia entry for the origin of coffee, how coffee is grown, like, all that kind of things, like how to grow it myself. It's not necessarily going to go there because it knows that people's typical intention is to go find a cup of coffee. This idea of intention is really interesting from a marketing standpoint, because as semantic search kind of continues to evolve and we see algorithm changes, it's this idea of topics, right? And so as it starts to get smarter about the reactions to topics, the location-based inferences around topics, it starts to learn and understand really when you type something in, it's like, do you want to buy something in this area? Are you trying to research something in this area? Are you trying to like share an idea around this area? Like, what are you really trying to accomplish? And this is what we talked about last week, right? There's all these ideas around keywords, and one of the things that I had suggested was taking keywords and trying to apply them to different areas of what people traditionally look at as a marketing funnel. And I think semantic search is a really good example of that, because it's talking about intention and context together, which is kind of what the marketing funnel is supposed to be doing, right? It's talking about like, where are you in the funnel with your intention towards this brand or product or whatever it is you're trying to do, and contextually, how do we talk to you about it?
So I was just wondering if you think that the best keywords for advertising are different from the best keywords for organic search.
That is a interesting question. It has a lot of really detailed answers depending on context of what you're talking about. As most interesting questions do. There's no way to give a kind of a blanket answer to say yes.
Ooh, I'll give one. I say yes. It's different.
All right.
There's a difference of opinion. Okay, what do you think, Erin?
Well, I just wanted to be definitive about, well, I figure, yes, I think it's different, mostly because in one form, you're telling like a paid advertising opportunity specifically what you want to match, and it will rarely match you with something that has nothing to do with that, versus if you create content, whether or not you're targeting keywords or not, you may be found for things, whether inadvertently or not, around a specific topic. So you could actually just go out and create really, really great content and be doing doing SEO.
Yeah.
You know, like whether you're trying to or not, but with advertising, like you specifically have to do this in Google AdWords. Like you have to pick some keywords, and it's going to serve your ad to people who choose those keywords.
So do you have any advice for optimizing content, search content for long tail keywords?
Yeah, I mean, for Longtail, the thing that's interesting about this whole conversation is that we're in this kind of transition phase between keyword-based search and semantic search. Um, Keyword-based search is still happening all the time, and targeting and optimizing for it is still very effective, and probably will be for a number of years. But the the semantic behavior of search engines is continuing to improve from a technology perspective all the time. So what marketers are stuck with doing is they're still targeting content for specific keywords the way they always have been, and that would be the case whether or not you're talking about, or whether you're talking about these kind of big head keywords versus long tail keywords. So the core basic organic search optimization principles still apply there. That being said, there are things that you can do to start boosting your support for semantic search. There's this thing called semantic markup, which is basically in addition to the metadata that you're already including in your web pages for your, like your title tag, your meta description tag, and everything else. There are a number of different formats out there that you can use. The most popular one probably is called schema.org, and it's pretty well documented. If you just go to schema.org, there'll be a ton of information about marking up your content. So one of the things you might think about doing, and we've seen this work really well for e-commerce companies, is start creating content and including that schema.org metadata directly in your content. You should do that whether you're dealing with long tail targeted content or content that you think is going to target kind of like the big head of keywords that you're going after.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about doing like a markup of content, because I think that this tends to scare a lot of people when we say things like we're moving more towards semantic-based search and away from keyword things, because a lot of people spend a lot of time and money setting things up, right? And it, as always, like change tends to terrify a lot of people, and they're worried they're going to lose traffic and that they've wasted a lot of money, which, to be fair, is not how it would work if you have actually created, again, back to really good content that is targeted towards what people are really looking for. Like the thing that we're talking about with like this creating content for long tail keywords is typically long tail keywords are a lot more specific around really specific queries and terms, which is why there's lower traffic volume on them. So if you're creating content around these really hyper specific things, chances are you're not going to do too bad with getting traffic there. Ray, do you want to touch on why people should not be terrified about kind of the move to semantic search if like they've been creating good content all along?
Yeah, just keep doing that. Basically, it's going to be start doing some research, but it's not like there's some new algorithm that you haven't been already dealing with for the last 2 years. So it's not like things have just changed because we're doing this show today. It's as much as I would like that to be the case.
Schrodinger's cat.
Exactly. Maybe there is. I don't know. No, but so just keep doing what you're doing, but start learning about semantic search. Start understanding. There's some good books out there. I think one of them is actually called Semantic Search. So understanding kind of the move, understanding the basics of the technology is going to be good for your career anyway as a marketer, because it's not going away.
How do you think that long-tail search, semantic search, is going to start affecting findability and keyword metrics?
I'm kind of, Aaron, maybe you can talk about this, but I'm actually having a hard time thinking of an example where semantic search would somehow behave differently for long-tail keywords than it would for larger keywords, other than the fact that kind of like these big head keywords are basically they might be a little bit more predictable around search volume because you're dealing with well-known established keywords. The advantage, of course, to going after long-tail keywords is that they tend to be less competitive, but you have to make that up in volume. The only difference there is if you start dealing with topics instead of actual keywords, then the search engines are going to index your site and potentially rank you might be different. But I would say, as of today, and given the technology today, I don't really expect that to be a huge difference.
Well, we all know I like to theorize about or make predictions about what I think is going to happen, so that somewhere ages and ages in the future, or potentially like 3 months from now, I can look back and laugh. But the idea to me around semantic search and the semantic web, and specifically the search angle of trying to tie intention and context together, is that these like larger, like big head keywords are going to, I think, fracture a little bit, because it's going to take into account things like location and previous search intention and like other contextual things around your actions. And so if I were to search for shoes where I am right now, and Ray were to search for shoes where he is right now, ideally we would end up eventually with two separate different things, right? Because like your location and my location are different, and your like previous actions and my previous actions are different. So for me, like I think that some of these things will actually start to see a little bit of a fracturing, and so you'll have less like less big head things that millions and millions of people all see the exact same results for. You already see that changing. You know, and I know that Google tried to make a lot of changes when it started doing, you know, like circles and like Google Plus and all this other stuff. Was it would, you know, serve up to you what people in your what people are talking about kind of specifically in your realm. And I think that this actually segues into the effect that social and kind of conversational context has around how Google is looking at intention and context around what everybody's talking about. So I think that there's these what's called right now long tail keywords, and I know Ray mentioned like having to make up for it in volume. I'm actually not sure you'll have to make up for it in volume that much, because it goes back to the original supposition that I would rather have 100 really relevant people trafficking a piece of content that actually would probably convert than 100,000 people accidentally ending up on my page because I paid for like a Google AdWords spot or like some keyword ranking stuff, and then people just bounce out. So, you know, like I'm kind of okay with lower volume and higher conversion. I mean, it's probably cheaper anyway.
So do you think that the importance of social media presence for brands is going to be become more important because of semantic search?
I don't know if important is the right. I mean, it's hard because people do social so horribly. I mean, people do a lot of things really horribly. Social is just a very obvious one of them, because it's so public when you just throw out awful things all the time and don't really have conversations. So one of the things that we talked about in a previous episode was, if you're going to do social, don't do this like dive bombing thing, right? Where you just come in, you make one comment, and then you piece back out, right? Because that's actually not really going to help unless you already have a really huge established following. There are people who go out and participate in one conversation one time, and then when you search for something, that conversation and that one thing actually ranks really high because they participated. So I think a lot of this is going to be about establishing the same way that it's about establishing like domain rank, right? So getting like a really valuable set of content or domain authority, right? Like building up domain authority, I think that there's like social authority. So building up kind of a following, context around content and topics that you are relatively known for. And you know who used to do a really good job of this, that they were bought, but was like, you know, Clout was talking about what topics do you really know about, what topics do you have a lot of authority on, and then assigning an authority rank about a topic to you. So I think that that's kind of similar to what Google could do in order to tie social more contextually into search results for people.
Yeah. I think I would agree with that. I think that's a really good way of putting it.
So how do you think semantic search makes ranking less technical and more content dependent then?
Again, it's never going to be less technical versus more content. It's technical. The technology side of things is always going to be really important, because to pretty much every marketer's chagrin, there's always going to be a very strong technical side of things to this, and making sure you're indexed properly. We talked about semantic markup earlier. All that stuff's going to matter probably even more going forward. In addition to that, you're going to have to figure out the way to translate the actions and conversions you're trying to get your customers to engage with into these kind of more generalized topics. So one of the things that's been very convenient about keyword-based searching has been there's usually when you are searching for something that is like, we talked about this purchase intent or commercial intent of keywords, I think last week. So it'd be the difference between saying recommended pair of shoes, which turns into, as you move down the potential conversion funnel, into things like best price on Nike running shoes, where you're already ready to buy a pair of Nike running shoes and you're just looking for the best price. Those are things that may get a little bit more muddy when you start talking about semantic search, because kind of teasing out the commercial intent from this more entity-based, context-based search is probably a little bit harder to target from a content perspective. The search engines won't have any trouble targeting it because they, in return, have a lot more information about where you are, what device you're on, what you're doing, what your searching habit has been. So they're going to know a lot more about you than you will as a marketer. But the challenge is going to be for you as a marketer to stay relevant in the midst of all that's going on. So it's kind of a new challenge. There is no definitive answer on a lot of this stuff. But the thing I would just recommend is continue to pay attention. Stay tuned with us. We'll be talking a lot more about this stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about this conversation between technical SEO versus content SEO is a lot of this stuff is legitimately the same thing and has really strong ties. So the way that I like to describe it is, especially if you're a marketer that has kind of a communications and journalism background, is if you remember having to write papers back in the day, like I did, when you actually physically had to write stuff down and go to a library and like look up stuff and like cite your sources and do these things, that's much the same as the more kind of like technical aspects of some SEO things, which is you want to make sure that you title pages appropriately. Like, so if you're going to write a report, title the report about something that has to do with the report. And if you're going to like cite your sources, you have to make sure that if you underline the sources and like you reference them in the end and do all these different things. A lot of this is the same way that the internet is working from a search perspective, and so it's looking at like links to and from your content, right? Like much the same as citing sources in a research paper, and then somebody might cite your research paper in their research paper. So I think that if you have ever had to put together like a really big, strong report and had to do any sort of referencing, had to put titles on pages, had to like subsection things, do these kinds of things, you can look at a lot of what has to do with creating content on the web and building up those technical things as basically just the online version of like document building 101.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, well, that's all the questions I have for today. If there's something either of you want to add in or some takeaways we can leave marketers with today?
No, for me, that I think that was a good discussion. It's one of those discussions that can get really deep very quickly, and I think that marketers are going to be looking for the biggest takeaways on some of this stuff. So I think from my perspective, the biggest takeaways on this today are keep paying attention, keep researching, keep reading about this stuff. Start thinking about semantic search. Start thinking about some of the technical sides of things like the markup that we talked about, and just pay attention to things because they're going to continue to evolve.
Okay, totally, and I think that there's also, like, if you want kind of a specific keyword takeaway from me, I would say that you want to get a good mix throughout kind of the keyword spectrum, I think, of things to target. And again, take your team size into account when you're looking at the total volume of things that you're really trying to track and create content around and manage from a marketing perspective. But also, kind of going back to this idea of topics, is you really want to group keywords into themes or topic groups, because this is going to help you really start to measure the efficacy of different topic groups groups or like marketing themes or campaigns or product lines or features or whatever, however you want to group things, and you can group things multiple different ways. It's one of the things we do in Ginza that I always try to stress the importance of. Create keyword groups and create content groups. Like, this is going to help you very much understand market shifts in how your content is starting to perform. Not just how your content performs one-on-one with your audience, but how your content performs with the search engines. So I think that's like kind of an easy tip that you could do today that'll probably help you out in the future.
Great. Well, hopefully this conversation will blow up my inbox again. Please feel free to contact me, Karen, at ginzametrics.com, or Aaron or Ray, all of us at ginzametrics.com. We're here to answer your questions. And if you have any great burning questions you'd like us to address on Future Found Fridays, we're happy to hear that too. Thanks you guys.
Everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.